Do Not Use the Elevators, Part 3. Written by SoChicken90. After the ding, we heard the door close, again, much too quickly it seemed like. And then we heard footsteps. It sounded kind of like footsteps, but the pacing just wasn't right. The movement and the impact with the ground seemed to be happening simultaneously, instead of one after the other. It was almost like someone was trying to simulate the sound of footsteps. Paul seemed to agree because, as he had when we first got into the stairwell, he shook his head. The message was clearly received. We listened for a while, and then we heard the ding again, followed by the door closing. Immediately after the door closed, we heard talking, and then walking, and then typing, and finally laughter. From all over the building. It was bustling. To my surprise, Paul began to unlock the chain on the hatch. "Wait a minute," I said. "Why are we leaving? And why did you lock us in here in the first place if we're just going to leave when there are more of them out there?" Now, I had no idea what I meant by them. Paul seemed to remember in that moment that we all needed a little explanation to coax us along. He took a deep breath, looked around the room, and explained the rules for the rest of the day. 1. Go straight to your desk and do your work like normal. 2. If anyone talks to you, answer their questions as if the last couple of hours never happened. 3. When you get your meeting invite for conference room 5NW at 2 p.m., accept it. But bring nothing from your desk with you. It's not yours. Heather was the first to protest. "Who are we going to be talking to? Who exactly is down there?" Paul's answer gave me chills. "Our co-workers. They'll be almost exactly as you remember them, but..." He paused for a while, trying to think of the right way to phrase the next part. "But you've never met them before. Oh, you'll think you have, and they'll think you have, but trust me, you haven't." "What if they know that we've never met?" Kathy said. She was oddly ready to accept Paul's explanation at face value. "Well then, it doesn't matter what you do after I open this hatch," Paul said. I'm still asking myself which way to take that. But we've had bigger questions to grapple with since then. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. As soon as he answered Kathy, he unlocked the hatch and opened it. We all climbed down, and this time Ryan was the last one down. Just as he was descending the ladder, someone opened the door to the south stairs. We all froze. It was Richard from accounting, or maybe not. I still don't understand how this all works. He had his headset on one ear and was balancing his laptop and a stack of papers in his hands. His eyes stayed down the entire time. As soon as he was one floor below us, Ryan closed the hatch and descended the ladder. Then he looked at Paul, just like the rest of us had. Paul simply nodded his head and off we went. It was about noon when we got back to our desks, and it was the most uncomfortable I've ever been sitting in that chair. I've sat in that chair for the last 4 years, and never once have I felt so exposed and somehow simultaneously alone. Erica actually I never really asked what she did. Or maybe still does. You guys would know better than me how things are going there. Anyway, whatever she does, and in whatever way she can be described as the same person that I've talked to countless times in the past as we warmed up leftovers, Erica came to my desk. "Did you leave your Tupperware in my trash can again?" She said. She was holding a Tupperware that sure looked a lot like mine. But I'd been in that weird room for the past couple of hours, so I said, "No, I don't think so." "Huh." "Someone wrote your name on it then," she said. She flashed a grin that I thought was meant to be flirtatious, but maybe it was just wishful thinking. I looked at the container, and sure enough, there was my name written on the inside of the lid. "Thanks," I said, doing all that I could not to break out into a nervous sweat. "I guess I forgot it again." "No problem, just make sure it's not fish next time," she said with a laugh. I hate fish. But this definitely smelled like fish. I forced a chuckle. "Of course, I don't want to be that guy," I said. "I like the new shirt, by the way," she said. She walked away, and I swear to God that I stared at the Tupperware for over an hour. The only other thing that I did before the meeting rolled around was to accept the invite. I walked to 5NW a little early. I was ready for some answers. Heather, Kathy, Ryan, and Paul were all already there. Paul had just started to open up a notebook that he'd written some notes in when Sam walked through the door. "Hey guys, I saw you were all in here and I realized you must have forgotten to add me to the meeting notice," he said. Even Paul looked terrified. Luckily, Kathy had an answer to satisfy him. "You're supposed to have that report for corporate done by Friday, so I thought I'd save you the hassle of a 2-hour meeting," she said. Sam looked really confused, and I could tell that he didn't know what report she was talking about. Fortunately, he never does. And as always, he feigned knowledge. "Oh yeah, of course. I'll finish that up and send you a rough draft by the end of the day," he said, and then awkwardly backed out of the room, turned and headed up for our desk area. "Did anyone else see him since, well, you know?" Ryan verbalized the question on everybody's mind. Heather calmed us down a little. "No, but you know how he is. He disappears for hours at a time sometime. Maybe he was dodging work since we got back or whatever." She paused for a beat and then looked at Paul and asked, "Is that the same Sam who walked into the elevator earlier?" "No," Paul said. Sometimes a single word tells a story that an entire book could never hope to. But we still needed some follow-up to that, even as much as that one word said all on its own. I was the first to ask, "Who the F was that then?" Paul looked back down at the notebook that he seemed to have been working on since we exited the room. "I need to lay out the groundwork of your fundamental understanding of where you are before I can answer that. I'm pretty sure you guys know you're not in the same office that you're used to, right?" I thought back to the Tupperware full of fish that I'd ostensibly eaten a couple of hours ago, and I couldn't help but agree. Yeah, this place isn't what it seems to be, I thought to myself. Kathy was also quick on the uptake. "What is this then?" she said. "It's the same building, more or less, with the same name. The same company owns it, the same people work here, doing the same jobs. And they're almost imperceptibly different than you would remember them being. But you've never been here before. You've never talked to these people, and you don't work for this company." I was more confused than when he had started talking, and I was about to protest his first attempt at an explanation when Heather interjected. "Are we in the juncture?" "We are," Paul said. "Now, we're not quite at home, but I don't really know how to describe where we're at." Morgan never really laid that out, even if he knew. He basically described what I think we would call parallel universes. But really parallel. I mean, to the point of almost being identical. Evidently, at least as he told it, these universes always unfolded in virtually identical ways. Which makes a certain amount of sense, I think. If we're all products of our environment and there are billions of realities, it would make sense that A, there are realities in which the first decade or even centuries of humanity unfolded in almost exactly the same way to the world that we know, and B, that would create environments that are much more likely than not to snowball in what would seem to us to be a predictable way. Anyway, seeing as how he seemingly wrote about these things that he shouldn't have known about, he found the juncture, happened upon some of the other universes, and he saw things only slightly different than our world. In one, as you might have guessed, we just did everything a little faster for all of history. So by the time we got to the late 1800s, we already had the Titanic and we called it the Titan. At this point, Ryan was sick of listening to Paul and said, "But what about that scream we heard? And why were people running from that direction? What happened to the real people that we know in our reality?" "Well, I don't know how they ended up, but the scream was almost surely from someone happening upon a custodian. And I assume that's what people were running from too. And let me assure you, we're going to find out for sure by the end of this day." "A custodian?" I said. I was a little more than confused. "Do you mean like a janitor?" I asked. "No, custodians are the only beings that Morgan ever confirmed to exist in the juncture as their base reality. They seem to be tasked with keeping everything exactly as it is. It's never to change, and it never has." "Well, why does this building look exactly like ours and the juncture?" Heather seemed desperate for an answer. "For whatever reason, this building, or at least the one that's virtually identical to it, exists in every reality. The juncture is the hub for all of them. You can go to whatever universe you want, but the juncture is a mandatory stop along the way." The conference room phone rang once at 2:20, alerting us that someone else had reserved the room too, starting at 2:30. We ignored it. We decided that if they showed up, we would insist on keeping the room. "But why was Morgan so freaked out about the elevators? And what happened to Sam after he got on one? Why did the reality seem to change for us even though we just sat in the room the entire time?" Ryan fired off everything, every thought in his mind. Paul simply pulled a folded piece of age-yellowed paper from his pocket and then slid it over to us. Ryan unfolded it and we all hunched over it. It looked to have been torn from a notebook and it said nothing but the consolidation at the top. We were confused. Paul spoke before we could ask. "This was an unfinished manuscript of sorts. Morgan jotted it down in a journal he kept in his dresser." "What else did it say?" Kathy asked, holding up the paper and motioning at the torn edge. "There were only 2 entries. The first was dated 7/24 and every paragraph was scribbled over, except for one phrase that I could make out. It read, 'the cavity.' The second entry was dated 8/5, and he seemed to have been cut off mid-thought at the very beginning." "Why? What did he say?" Ryan asked as he leaned over the table at this point. "All of the elevators are open." The conference room phone rang again. It was 2:25. Paul was visibly annoyed at the interruption. He hit the info button on the phone to see who was about to barge in, and he immediately went pale. We all crammed around the phone's display for a look. It read, "Conference room 5NW. Meeting name, cleaning progress. Required attendees, all custodians."